Hello, hello, and welcome to another Sunday Superversive live stream. I am your host, Benjamin Wheeler, and today I'm with Anthony Marchetta, but sadly, and my deepest apologies, not David V. Stewart. He did agree to be on the show, but he
Hello,
has not
hello,
shown
and
up.
welcome to another Sunday
Oh my goodness,
Superversive
I
live
have
stream.
made the
I
cardinal
am your
sin.
host, Ben.
There we go, turned it off. But unfortunately, he is not with us today. I have not heard hide or hair from him since we last talked last night. Um, so one hopes that he will be arriving shortly, or if something happens, that it would be changed up. I'll change up the description at a later date for it. Again, my apologies. I'm not sure what's up with that. Trying to start the New Year's off with a bang. Try to keep things going. Mm,
Oh no.
I'm depressed already, Anthony. What a year. I'm gonna go back and
What a
eat
year.
Jacob's cream crackers and drink Coca-Cola. How about that? Get a nice depression nap
There you go. That's the spirit. Wait,
in.
what? Uh,
No, 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 no. A lot of this is was what I'm going to be trying to do is besides our own Protestant versus Catholic and our writer things, and the occasional anime review. I do want to really put some effort into the Superversive Sunday podcast. Uh, in the year ahead.
yeah, for reasons that are like legitimately, and I mean this with no sarcasm beyond me. Superversive Sunday has, despite like relative to the show, very little effort put into it. I don't mean there's really like we do put some effort into it, but like comparatively, very little effort put into it has been the consistently more popular one and the only one of between this and Pinkerton's Ghosts. And like the one that I could see us genuinely getting a following if we do put effort, Pinkerton's Ghost, I have no idea. Like it's just I am legitimately at a loss. And that I don't mean this to sound depressing. Like I'm not really depressed over it. It just kind of is what it is. You know, like like it doesn't upset me per se. I'm just like, for some reason, the podcast is more popular despite us putting less effort into it, which does make me wonder, what if we did put effort into it? How popular could it be? I don't know. All I know is I put out notes for this episode and everything. Uh, I made a list, so I'm a little disappointed not to talk about it because I actually put some thought into what we were going to be discussing, but that's okay. Things, yeah, gotta roll with those punches.
Perhaps this is a fantastic metaphor for the Gen Y experience, Anthony. You are here with me,
I'm not Gen Y.
experiencing
I
it.
wouldn't know.
I know you're a filthy millennial. So I can't believe I'm on the same live stream with you. Uh, oh well. David Stewart's work is pretty great, actually. Um, his short stories are pretty good. His fiction's pretty good. I had him on a long time ago for I think Eyes in the Walls. Back when I think this was a solo show, maybe. Um, his Eyes in the Walls is a absolutely fantastic piece of horror, especially for a sort of genre of horror that we've only seen in things like Stranger Things, where it touches on like what I would call like real Americana, not like New York American, which is basically Italy or something like that. The Sopranos, all this other stuff, but like the idea of what an actual quote unquote normal American is. Almost all the characters in Stranger Things are old American stock, and even the black kid's family has been here for several hundred years, for better or for worse. So it's not like it's one of those things where you could separate Stranger Things from the American experience. Eyes in the Walls, which I should actually link in here. Uh, just because I enjoy it so much as a story, uh, is a pretty good uh, is a pretty good taste of that stuff. Uh, his his flavor for horror is pretty exquisite, and something that I enjoy in general. In general, and it follows through to the Afterglow series of short stories, where basically he hits on certain things that were very true to life back in the day. We've talked about Gen Y multiple times uh, on this channel with Brian Niemeyer and others, and it and JD Cohen as well. That was a good stream actually. Uh, but it's something I kind of want to talk about. Partially because of malignant narcissism, but also because of just a desire to make sure this stuff isn't forgotten. Like there is something that existed that's no longer here, but and this is very important, it died before anyone could notice it or appreciate it. So everyone is just kind of, when we talk about it, we're kind of like picking over the bones of it, knowing that it's there and knowing it existed, but not able to do anything with it due to, the fact that it's dead. And it wasn't like a cultural thing. Like you can't dress up like a Gen Y kid. What are you gonna do? Like wear a jean jacket, wear jean pants? Nah. If the malls are closed or people are getting murked in the mall daily, I don't really recommend it the same way. It's gone. Uh, I was still I was
So looking,
go for it.
oh, go ahead. I was just going to look at the comments because Aaron VT and Sam both have comments. Aaron says, show could be very popular if you start an author interview kick. I have ideas. Uh, Ben does as well. Specifically, I enjoyed speaking with Father Weta, who loved his book. Interesting guy. We got along well. And I would love to have him. By the way, when I say I have ideas, I want to be clear that when I say this, this is not a promise because I haven't talked to any of them about this. It's just stuff I think would be cool.
Yeah.
And I'd love to get him on to talk with John C. Wright because we showed him Awake in the Nightland and he said he enjoyed it. And I feel like they would get along well together. Uh, I want to talk to the channel Gospel Simplicity again. What was it? I'm blanking on the name of the guy who runs it, but he agreed to do it. Then he got ill, so I'm sure he would agree again. And then I got busy at like around the same time, so I couldn't reschedule properly, unfortunately. But like he did not cancel for any reason besides like he got ill. So I am sure he would be willing to do it again if I talked to him about it.
It's us, Anthony. It's us.
And I
I
want
know it's us. We're making these people ill.
I hope he actually told us though in advance, like to his credit, he didn't bail. Like he actually sent a message going like I'm ill.
I'm
Uh,
scared, Anthony.
and
What if everyone we bring on has misfortune happen to them? I don't want to be the cause of that. What witch
I'm
casts
gonna
a
keep
spell on
going.
us?
I'm gonna keep going with my sentence and assume, and just like keep going on this train of thought. And I would really like to talk to El Jaji Lamplighter again about One Piece when I get further into reading it, because she's the world's biggest One Piece fan. Uh, and I am an appreciator of One Piece. I'm not a super fan, but I enjoy it and I have a lot of respect for it. So I think that it would be a lot of fun to talk to her about One Piece. Sam Goyer says, I still wear my jean jacket. I wear a jean jacket and I'm not even Gen Y. Jean jackets are dope. Don't no problem with them. Um, and he says that that David V. Stewart captures Gen Y and the West's obsession with nostalgia perfectly. Yeah, it's interesting looking at the Gen Y phenomenon. A lot of the people who we follow in like the pulp rev and superversive fiction movement are Gen Y and are starting to get more and more involved in the Gen Y scene. You know, like Brian Niemeyer, J.D. Cohen, David V. Stewart, uh, there's somebody else who I'm blanking on, but like the Gen Y experience. If anything, the part that is least represented in the superversive fiction movement from what I've noticed is millennials. Like there aren't as many who are vocal, which is okay because millennials are very loud in society. So I'm not saying, oh, we need more millennials. We don't. Uh, we need less millennials.
Yeah.
But yeah, but like I've seen a lot of Gen Y. I do think that one day a discussion on like the millennial experience because it's so often misdiagnosed. Like Brian, I think captures the actual millennial issue very well. And he pointed out one thing that I think we've discussed before, and that is very true, is that since the boomers, all the generations following the boomers, which are, by the way, to recap for people here who don't know this, we're using the take that is used by Brian Niemeyer and JD Cohen. They came out with, I don't know if they invented it, I don't think so, but they have a list, a generational breakdown that goes something like this. Since the baby boomer generation, we have had Generation Jones. That's the generation immediately following. And Generation Jones is one of the quote unquote forgotten generations. Uh, they are called such because they Jones after what their parents had, but they don't really know how to get it. Generation X, so named because people cared so little about them, they did not give them a name. What? That's honestly only partly a joke.
I no, like I've never thought of it like that before, but I completely believe it.
Yeah, that's only partly a joke. I'm sure that there's some other reason, but it feels right, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Generation Y, which is the generation that came around the 80s to 90s and is the subject of the current nostalgia boom. And the millennial generation, which was late 90s to early 2000s, really just late 90s to be honest, like because part of the this theory that Brian came up with is that the generations start to get compressed into smaller and smaller time frames because of the rapid advancement of like internet culture, basically made the experiences of growing up in each era so vastly different. So he would identify the millennial generation as being part of a shorter time span than you might be used to seeing in like these traditional looking lists. And then following that is Gen Z, which are, the Zoomer generation. Uh, Gen Z is very they're sort of not I would classify them as like borderline nihilistic to the point of absurdist. And finally what we have currently, the generation that's like in middle school and high school now that's growing up is I have heard it called Generation Alpha. I have heard it called the last generation. Uh the last generation I like, but I do think that there's a prediction hidden in there. uh, I think it's a kind of a risk to call it a generation. The last generation, Generation Alpha is okay. I mean, it needs a name. I don't know why they picked it, but sure. So, when yeah, Bradford Walker points out not just internet culture, media culture. The media explosion post World War II is what caused the acceleration. Yes, he is right. Uh, that is a very good clarification, and I agree. I was just struggling with how to express it. It wasn't specifically internet culture. It was the rapid advancement in media caused the eras to start getting shorter and shorter because the experience of growing up with the various media influencing you was so vastly different. So, yeah, speaking as Gen Y is characterized specifically by things like divorce, by growing up in a culture that they were told worked, but that when they actually went into it and lived it the way they were told, it did not work. Uh, right?
Yep.
They were told follow the rules and this will happen, and they followed the rules and it didn't happen. So the Gen Y experience is like, what do you make of that? Like, what do we do? And again, I want to be clear here too that every generation since the baby boomers is a victim generation of the baby boomers. Uh, does that mean that I blame the baby boomers for all of our problems? Like, kind of, yeah. Uh, Like, you probably don't expect me to say that, right?
Right.
But, like, I sort of do. With that said, obviously nothing is that simple or black and white, right?
Right.
Like,
Like
the
the
thing is
silent
that I'm.
generation, made a lot of the culture that the baby boomers took for rebellion, that sort of thing. Like it's
Yes.
complicated in a way, but it's also the fact that I don't think, like, from everything I've read or seen about David Bowie, there's nothing in his career that says he wanted to tear down anything. Like, at worst, you could say he followed the lead of other older silent
Hmm.
gens in their own very explicit takedown of society, quote unquote society, like Andy Warhol and the various homosexuals and transsexuals of New York who were the art scene at the time. But he himself, in the end, only ever supported, you know, society. Like, there's
Yeah.
there's classes of artists, and the silent gen has more than their fair share of society haters, or at least they broke open the doors for it. I honestly don't think art was any good until like how do I want to put it? Like the boomer art wasn't good. Gen X art was kind of good. Gen Y art is really good. Millennials isn't good, but some of the stuff I'm starting to see from Gen Z is starting to pop a little bit, which I think is interesting.
Yeah, it's I'm thinking right now. It is interesting, right? Like, so when I say I blame the baby boomers for it, I mean it in this very specific sense. I don't blame the baby boomers for, like, how they were raised, right? However, it is simply a fact.
Yep.
And it is a fact that people will try and deny, but they will not be able to. It is simply a fact that the baby boomers were the first generation in a very long time in America, probably since like World War II, or earlier. Maybe even a little bit earlier than that, actually, since
Like,
before World War II, that left their progeny in a worse shape than when they got the country. The
yeah,
Silents didn't. The Greatest Generation didn't. The Baby Boomers did, and they have also. It is also, like, I think, a fact, more or less undeniable, that the Baby Boomers have tried very hard not to take the blame for this, like, in any way.
yep,
Uh, the millennial people have noticed, like, they go, well, why are millennials complaining about baby boomers? They're so similar to baby boomers. Well, the reason we're so similar to baby boomers is because baby boomers intentionally did that. Like, they were trying to create, a new generation of people who were like them, and then they started complaining about how millennials, I'm sorry, acted entitled, which is, pretty ludicrous coming from the most entitled generation. But yeah, whatever. Now, the actual sin, right? Like, the actual sin of millennials is completely different than what everybody thinks it is. Like, people, the misunderstanding of millennials is arguably greater than that of other generations. Gen Y is unnoticed, right?
yep,
People don't even realize it exists. Gen X is ignored, and but millennials are just completely misinterpreted. The sin of millennials is acedia, which is the old term for the sin of sloth. And I refer to this in its very ancient sense when it was, acedia is the sin of you don't know. I'm trying to think of how to put this in a way that makes sense to modern people, right? Like, it makes sense in my head, but people don't use this language much anymore, so it's difficult to get across. It's not that millennials are lazy and don't work. It's that millennials have seen previous generations doing this work, and it clearly didn't help them. Like, you look at Gen Y and then you go, like, look at these lazy millennials not doing their retail work. I've had Gen Xers, like, people who I otherwise respect, really have a they really have a blind spot when it comes to millennials. Like, there was a Gen Xer who I talked to, and I'm not going to say who because I like the guy, but I was arguing with him like online, and he was talking about how millennials were just the worst, most entitled generation ever. He had similar issues. Did you see him complaining about it? No. He worked. He worked 2 jobs. So, I have a few issues with this. Number one of that is, and do you think like any of that was okay? Like, I
Yep.
understand the idea of like, well, life isn't fair. You got to deal with it. You do, yes. Like, I agree with this, but at the same time, like, can we at least acknowledge that what happened to you was also not fair? Like,
Right.
you know, I don't think that you need to. I'm not saying that you need to build your life around this. I don't. Like I acknowledge this, and I can promise you, whatever it sounds like here, I absolutely do not dwell on this to the exclusion of all else. Like, you could believe me or not, but it's the truth. Uh, with that said, I can absolutely acknowledge that I was screwed over by previous generations, and so were you, my Gen X friend, who had to work like 3 different jobs, postpone getting married, work as a bartender, long hours. You know, are you seriously telling me that you have no problem with any of that? Is number one.
Yep.
And number two, what you are describing is so different from the millennial experience. Like, you have no idea. You have no idea what I'm even talking about. Like, if I were to do what you did, it would not solve my problems.
Yeah.
And I don't say this with any amount of resentment, like, because it's true. Resentment doesn't help things. I'm just saying it as a bald fact. Like, I could work as hard as all that, and it would not solve my issues. And then there's the other problem here was, let's say everybody did what you did and delayed getting married while they worked 2 jobs to pay off the crippling debt that they're in. Like, do you honestly think that this is going to end up in a good place in the future in society? Like, this is you think that we've set people up for success on this path, delaying families, delaying building connections? You might go like, oh, well, millennials have so many issues that they shouldn't be building these connections, and I sort of get your point. But at the same time, one of the reasons that they have these issues is that they don't have these connections. We're so atomized, as not Megabuster Shepard, Bradford Walker says. No, Megabuster Shepard, I was right the first time. By the way, hi, Megabuster Shepard.
Hey,
Welcome.
hey, hey.
Yeah. Uh, he says that we're so atomized in our culture, right? Like, we can't build connections with other people. I am very close with like my immediate family and nobody else. It is very hard for me, like, factually very hard. Not even very hard for me specifically, though it is just because my temperament is very introverted, but it is very hard for me to build connections with other people. Society is not set up in that way anymore, right?
Yep.
This is a conversation that I've had with my own parents, who like just have trouble understanding this because they grew up, and even, by the way, in the time that this happened with them, they were probably in one of the last such communities in America, and they didn't even know it. But they grew up in Italian American communities, like, where they didn't live in the same town, but they lived close enough. They had connections where like relatives were friends with each other, and that's how they met. And multiple people in their families married high school sweethearts. That does not happen. Like, I do not know. I'm trying to think of a single person I know who married their high school sweetheart. I can't think of any. They all know several, including themselves. My parents were high school sweethearts who got married. Like, that is not a thing anymore. It just isn't. You could draw whatever conclusions you want from it. I would surmise it's not good. So when you talk about the millennial sin being acedia, it's this idea that we're constantly searching for some sort of meaning in our lives, and we have no idea what it is. Like, what do we do? That's why millennials attach themselves to causes, right? Radical
Yep.
causes. And it's also why, as Ryan Niemeyer pointed out, like, what is the secret to, how does a millennial break out of it? Because it's not the same way as a Gen Y would break out of it.
Right.
The way a millennial breaks out of it is humility. It is realizing that, we're not going to have that impact on the world that we thought we would have, and that is okay, right? Like,
Yep.
that we're never going to be a mover and a shaker. We're not going to have what our parents had, and learning and humbling ourselves about it, right? Like, I mean, this is what happened to me, right? Like, I'm not going to go into specifics because I never go into specifics publicly, but I had to be humbled in a very profound way in order to fully trust in God, and that's what happened. And other millennials, though, they get humbled, and that's not the path they go down, right? You get that fork in the road, and you need to decide which way, Western man, right?
Right, right.
Like, and that's where I ended up. And I ended up on a path where I am not going to be, the odds of me being remembered after I die are going to be low. And I'm okay with that because I'm a Christian, right? Like, that's not my goal. My legacy doesn't end when I die. Nobody ends when they die. We're here for eternity, right? Like,
Yep.
that's so once you understand that and you can put things in proper perspective, the acedia starts to become less of an issue. This issue of like, what do I do? I'm stuck in this quicksand and this mire and I don't know where to go next. And then you find this peace in God, right? Like,
Yep.
now Gen Y is a totally different experience. So Ben, I'll let you talk more about that since you are our Gen Y.
Yeah, and it's. I guess I'll talk about the sort of the sin nature for a lot of this stuff. Um, for Gen Y, I view it as kind of a slurry of like envy, jealousy, but above all sloth. Um, a lot of it is just kind of like you can't raise your hand to feed yourself porridge in a bowl that's under your chin. To use an old story, I can't remember the name of, but essentially, it's hard for me, like as a Gen Y guy, even though I was born in '89 and like the cutoff is mostly '88. I've never really held to the '88 year. I believe that you could even extend it out to '90, just because of how I've seen my co birth years act. But that's neither here nor there. Um, and a lot of it is like the hardest part isn't some sort of like, well, the world's unfair. Okay, fine. I heard the world isn't fair, life isn't fair all the time in my life. And my response has always been, yeah, life isn't fair, but I expect people to be. um, you know, there's all sorts of things going on with people that you don't know, sure, but like everyone else is interested in themselves. You have to have a certain amount of self-interest and be willing to fight and die for it. But the thing is that Gen Y does has already accepted others people's interest without seeing their own interest. Like one of the things I'm doing is I'm realizing that I actually do hunger for everlasting glory. Um, I think it's like Dekios Kleos or something like that in the Greek, where undying glory, undying fame, and we're born in a generation where that spirit, which I've recognized has always been inside me, never gets any encouragement. You're always encouraged to sort of be a part of the crowd in Gen Y. You had your clique, you had your group, and you were a part of that group. And you never really broke out of it in the same way that a lot of other people kind of experience these days. So, even though my experience has been very small, a lot of it has tamped down on what should have been, my drive to succeed, to do the best in the things that I've got. But it never sort of came because you don't want to hurt other people's feelings. Oh, you don't want to put your will on someone else's will to get something done. But I'm seeing other people, and I'm trying to model myself after people who are more successful. And a lot of these people would trample on somebody if it kept their boots clean. Now, I'm not going to turn into Andrew Tate or something like that. Be a pimp in Eastern Romania or whatever he was. But I'm saying that there's a certain amount of the spirit of activity, and by the way, the sins that having a very active life would bring, versus uh, uh, versus like what the millennials have, which is a baseline of activity. The thing is with Gen Y is that because there's so much fulfillment through the toys and through the movies and through the corporate IP and so on and so forth, there's never been a big drive to push yourself beyond the limits that you naturally have. So while I sit and desire things, other people seem to, go out and take naturally. But the thing is that I also have to, live a life. I am set before God as uniquely made as my friend Anthony here, as my friend W, or as other people, who have many different layers of success. So, you know, it's not enough to be a guy who manages a warehouse or a guy who has his own apartment. I have to excel at the life I am given by God. And as long as we honor God, I don't think He minds too much of the how and the why. If you're working
Yep.
His purpose and you're working, to His will, you can do certain things, that are acceptable. Like, uh, yeah, I was reading Acts, and there's Paul and Peter and him get into an argument over the Judaizers, but then it's like I read this point and it's like, wait a minute, the Judaizers who started this whole thing with Peter came from James, who was in Jerusalem. So there's implications that, even though I don't think James was a Judaizer himself, but there's like other like layers to this that are passive in the background. Peter was receiving work from James, who had sent the Judaizers to him. I'm not saying it very well, but I'm saying that there's other steps to it that people don't talk about because it requires knowledge of the early church that is not talked about in Acts. With this stuff, uh, you know, now that I am an aware Gen Y, the choices I have to be onward and upward, farther up and farther in. I have to act on my business things. I can't be a sad sack sitting in my room playing video games because life didn't give me what I wanted. But it's not even that I wanted a lot. Like, that's the thing that people kind of don't get about Gen Y. It wasn't that they wanted the McMansion and the CEO job or anything like that. Most Gen Y is pretty happy with a little. Like, even if you took the toys out of the occasion, most of the Gen Y men I know in my life are actually just pretty humble, easygoing guys. Even the ones with a bit of fire to them, kind of have like a small fire compared to, other generations. So you can't just like sort of put it down to, oh well, they desire more things. They're envious. Well, no, it's not so much envy as it is sloth. Not being willing to uh, sort of raise your hand from your bowl to your mouth. Um,
So, one of the interesting things is that I was watching Eyecatch Wolf's video on Chainsaw Man. I don't know if you have or not.
of course,
Yeah, good video by the way. Eyecatch Wolf.
S
I
tier.
think he's. Yeah, I think Eyecatch Wolf can be a little bit. I don't know. When you listen to him for long enough, you can hear a bit of gamma in him. But like
Oh
his
yes.
videos are extremely high quality, like extremely high. And the Chainsaw Man video was excellent. One thing that struck me, and he doesn't use the language we do. He doesn't follow the people we follow, so he wouldn't use this. But was that Chainsaw Man was the story of Gen Y. Even the timeline, like he doesn't. Chainsaw Man. A lot of people don't realize this. Chainsaw Man is a period piece,
Yep.
right? It's a recent period piece, but the period that's in is like Gen Y, the late 90s, right?
Yep.
And Gen Y was growing up. And one thing that really interested me, and again, like, Eyecatch Wolf didn't make this direct connection because he doesn't divvy up the generations the way we do and doesn't understand it the way we do. But it's effectively, I noticed this, and he was getting at it without using the same wording. Denji was like the ultimate Gen Y hero. And it was a fascinating insight, something I had never really considered. That Fujimoto, the creator of Chainsaw Man, specifically created Genji as somebody with no ambition. Now, partially, this is to contrast with people like Luffy and Deku, the tradition and Goku, right? Traditional shonen heroes who are
Yep.
ultra ambitious. And don't get me wrong, that's absolutely a part of it. Like it would be ridiculous if you didn't acknowledge that. But I don't think it's a coincidence that it's set in the time period that it is. And I think that in many ways, Denji is supposed to represent Generation Y, a people who are so deadened by society, like the disappointment of society, that their ambitions rise to the level of nice home, decent food, friends, right?
Might be nice.
Like this is why the Gen Y, what is the Gen Y fantasy? The Gen Y fantasy is, as Brian pointed out on his blog, meeting for D&D with your buddies, and this is such an powerfully intoxicating thing to a Gen Y because it's like the happiest that you are. Basic, but think about what that means. Basic human connection, like not even something as intense as a romance, right?
Right.
Literally just friends.
Yep.
Yeah, and Aaron VT says, I hate the term sloth versus acedia. And yeah, Aaron VT is absolutely right. He goes, I'm not saying still, I'm in your constant state of uneasiness and agitation, which is what gets in my way, and the source is despair, not laziness. Right. I've had the similar things happen where it's like, I'm not getting stuff done. Is it because that I just like don't want to do the work? Well, no, it's because I'm looking at my future and I've this is something that I had to come to terms with years later, like processing it, right? But it wasn't because I just, couldn't or didn't want to do the work. The work wasn't ultimately that hard that I'm referring to, like comparatively speaking.
Right.
But it was the sense of where I was thinking in the back of my mind, like, what's the point? You know,
Yeah.
like, why am I doing this? What is like, why am I putting this effort in for something that I don't care about? I'm not happy about. Now, this is a sin, right? Like, it's a deadly sin. It's a lie of the devil, and it's the sin of the millennial and expressed in a different way in Gen Y.
Yeah, and I want to be clear, like I know plenty of hardworking Gen Y men. I'm talking in an overall like narrative context. Where previous generations reached for the stars, Gen Y, if they could, would prefer to reach for the home loan and let the adventurers take care of it. And there's a purpose for these generations. If things weren't so corrupt, basically what would happen is that you'd have this heroic core of astronauts like millennials and Gen Z who would go up, and Gen Y would essentially make sure everything works for them when they get back. Like there's like
Yep.
if things were working in context, Gen Y would be this fertile ground of essentially a rock, of a home that they would have guaranteed, to do it because Gen Y doesn't change their opinions. Gen Y likes things how they had it as a kid. If Gen Y, if the average Gen Y was given a wish saying, "Yeah, so you could lock American culture in to 1995 for 100 years, but then it kind of falls apart after," he'd be like, "Yeah, no problem. I'm not going to be alive for that." Uh, the cultural sort itself out. And I don't mean that every generation born would be part of Gen Y or a millennial or whatever. I mean there would be natural progression of generations, but there are things to the mindset that if a Gen Y could stop it in its tracks, it could. Like part of the reason why, the 20-year generational cycle was so useful was that it allowed a whole generation of people to reach adulthood and have substantial time for the morphing between generations. Like, think of it like one of those median graphs, where it's like, yeah, 1984, 1985 was peak Gen Y, and then it goes down to 89, 90, but it started peaking, 79, 80, that sort of thing. Like, there's more to it than just, an explicit year. Like, it isn't a sharp line. But yeah, it's hard to pin it down. But it's like the Gen Y isn't wrathful. The Gen Y doesn't really have the same like it doesn't seek after wealth the same way. It's not proud. It's it's not really jealous of what other generations have. It's just kind of confused that they don't have it. Like, because here's the thing about envy. Envy motivates. Jealousy motivates. Like, they have internal motivational engines towards worldly excellence. I say worldly, not spiritual, but like worldly excellence. Getting the house, getting the trophy wife, getting this, getting that. My uncle hated my father, and that drove him to absolute successes. And now that he's retired and he has all all that he has, and to be clear, my uncle is a baby boomer and my father is Generation Jones. Now that it's at certain points in their lives, when it was in my uncle's hand to bless my father, he refused and even hurt him. And at the same time, my dad was a giant of a man. When they fought each other, my dad could just sit on him. There's things that were culturally a part of it that you can see in your own family if the years and generations work out right. I had a grandfather who was part of the lost generation. Great grandfather, great uncle. What? He was something like that. He was basically a grandfather. Uh, and he just kind of didn't know how to interact with me, so he just took walks around the neighborhood. Um, it's one of those things where the reach out, the touch of how the generations interact with each other changes based on the internal nature of uh the person who's part of it. Like, I know a lot of Gen Jones guys, and a lot of them are wrathful. Like, if they're not careful, baby boomers have a lot of pride. They have a lot of jealousy and envy. Like, it's you can see how these things interact with each other, uh, where it becomes more than just the children of the generation, but rather like what they took over from them to from one place to another. And it never the reason why we find it such a fertile ground for discussions is because it does bring up quite a bit of explanation for the modern world. When Gen Y, which naturally knows that it is supposed to take a certain amount of control, doesn't take control, they're not going to be able to take control. Like, even now, even as I'm, hitting the gym, even as I'm being ambitious at work, even as I'm, figuring out schemes to make money, as I'm promoting this show and trying to get high profile guests on here, as I'm promoting Pinkerton's Ghosts, that's not me doing what's natural. It's me doing to myself and saying, I must do this for even a crumb of success. And I must do this because other people rely on me. In the end, if I like sort of play around and work on my natural ambitions, I'm not gonna want to do anything. My chair's comfortable. I like playing Elden Ring. It feels accomplishment when I kill a boss. Because those bosses are hard. Like, that stuff's never far away from what is available to me. And I think people don't really see that in the same way. Like, it's like, a lot of the Gen Y guys in my life, they achieved the house or the wife and stuff like that, and now they're coasting. And I don't have that. Maybe I'm a little envious, maybe I'm a little jealous, but it's like, to get that, I have to push myself, whereas for many it's natural. And then, you know, but there's a spiritual nature to me. I seek God in all the things that I do. That isn't sin. Uh, that isn't native to them. I'm not willing to play the games that other people are willing to play. And in fact, I find them disgusting. Maybe that's the reason why I make a decent bouncer. I'm not going to take a shot and flirt and go around back with some floozy who wants her fake ID back. Like it's there's checks and balances to every individual person, but my basic rest state is as a Gen Y slothful, I don't want to go to the gym. That sort of thing. Let's real quick cover some comments here, and we'll keep talking
Yep.
after. Carl Phillips Gabler says Eyes of the Walls was really good. Oh, absolutely. Half of my criticism of our guest not being here is tongue in cheek. I'm sure he's got something going on. He's got things going on that he's talked about on his Twitter and live streams and such that I'm not going to bring up here. But he's got stuff going on. Bradford Walker, not just internet culture, media culture. The media explosion post World War II is what caused the acceleration. I agree. And I think it'll actually slow back down to about 20 years once it gets normalized, if you get me. Once people get used to the media stuff and things either get so chaotic no one can take it, because people can still follow what's going on for a lot of it, or things get so normal that nobody cares. Sam Goyer, yeah, yes, there's definitely a huge difference between those born in the late '90s, from early '90s, and from those late '90s and early thousands. Yeah, early '90s. Uh, the lag time between centers of culture, Bradford Walker, the lag time between centers of culture and the far ends of their dispersion dropped continuously since World War II until the widespread adoption of the internet erased it entirely. Yeah. Megabuster Shepard, the culture is too atomized. ATM, the world of the 90s seems like a fever dream. Yeah, it does. Like, there's a lot of great, like, vaporwave pieces of art and WebMBs and songs and stuff like that that really kind of hit it. You'd be shocked. Go to your mall, and usually they have the abandoned areas unlocked for the cleaners, and you just walk in. So essentially, you sit or stand or whatever, or just walk around or whatever you're doing in an abandoned part of the mall, and you can hear the rest of the mall around you. And if you close your eyes, does it almost seem like nothing's changed at all? But if it's like Bastille's Pompeii. Uh, it's got something there that even though I was mostly housebound due to circumstances outside my control, I still understand and recognize it. It has a part of me in my heart that this was part of my experience in my childhood, even though I only got a taste of it. Uh, let's see. Bradford Walker again. You'd have to go back to the generation in power around World War One to find a boomer-like generational cohort. The Gilded Generation, that era, certainly has a run for it. But to be fair to the Gildeds, they did work pretty darn hard, and a lot of their problems were the rules allowing them to be self-destructive rather than rebellion against the rules. I am tired of my bootstraps by bloviators. Yeah, yeah, we both are. The Anthony and you and all everyone else, because there's a
Yep.
certain arrogance to it. Like, I'm gonna be real. The reason why I have it even so good as I do now is because of God Almighty. That's it. God provides all men a certain amount. He allows for people to succeed or to ruin themselves because he does not interfere with our free will in a way that I can mention in less than a minute. Uh, just because you found success doesn't mean that other people could find success. There is a thing that I was shown where I would basically get a loan and I would invest, and in about 3 years or 5 years or so, someone will buy that investment from me. I don't have to do anything with it or anything like that. I just have to make sure I make minimum payments for however long I have it. But the thing about it is that God could go, no one's ever going to want the thing that you're invested in. They will literally buy everything around it to the square inch, and they'll never want what you own. God can't allow that to happen and then just saddle me with something just because I try to do something that's outside of God's will, even though it is a small thing. Like ridiculous things can happen to ruin what you hope is your worldly success. And in the same way, the thing that could bring you success could be, you being a friend to some random guy in a bar. And he's like, hey, man, you know, I need someone like you at my job. Go to this address. And then it turns out, he runs a brewing company or something, and he wants someone to run his docks. Like I owe my job to a random conversation between two people at a gym. It's like you don't know how life and how things will be treated until it happens. Every single bootstrapper could have failed miserably at everything they've ever done, but for the grace of God. Let's see here. There's a reason, Brad Megabuster Shepherd. There's a reason our generation makes just enough to pay for Xbox Live and tunes the rest out. Yep. I think Aaron VT. I think Gen Y and Millennials would be less bitter if not for student loan debt. That's a historically unique burden, as far as I'm aware. Yeah, but we also don't have like things that other generations have, like war and whatnot. And other
Yep.
generations also experienced very severe uh, generational debt at certain times. The reason why, Superversives in general promote Jubilee, debt Jubilee, is because debt always destroys the nation, the people, the generation that it's on. And I'm not talking like debt to get a house. I'm talking student loan debt or debt incurred trying to feed your family. Let's see. Megabuster Shepherd, born at the tail end of '89. I feel you. Sam Goyer. I think the satiation with old corporate IPs is dying as Gen Y approaches middle age. That's where Christ is coming in for a lot of us. I agree. There's a lot of things going on spiritually that I understand are of God, but I don't get it. The big one is the promotion of evangelicalism in South America. Like a lot of people are going, oh, look at these numbers, And, apologies to Brian Niemeyer and to Anthony there, but I'm gonna go on. But there's a huge Presbyterian and evangelical kind of charismatic movement going on in South America. Well, it turns out part of the leadership of some of these movements are absolutely insane. Doolally, they're shit hive maggots, like whatever you want to throw in there, to say that they're crazy. They are. Like one guy's like, I'm going to call down God's blessing by building a replica of Solomon's temple. Give me money to do it. And then the madman did it. Like these people are not sane. But the thing that's happening is that Bible ownership is skyrocketing. So people are reading their Bibles. which is leading them to Christ in a separate from the charismatic movements that are going on in there. So you have, coming from the baby boomer generation, which was global in one way or another, which did not go to church, didn't read their Bible, didn't care about anything spiritual except what satisfied themselves, to a generation that's going, man, Pastor Hernandez or whatever his name is, built Solomon's temple in Brazil, uh, but reading my Bible shows me that he's a charlatan and a crook. There's only salvation through Jesus Christ. And missionaries, the IFCA group and others, are finding that, there's people are starting to know the scripture a bit more. And it opens up conversations, which opens up millions to salvation, which I think is the funniest way, what hopefully is the beginning of revival ever. You know, the issues that are going on with some of the Catholic Church and the mainline Protestant churches, they're driving people away. But what's happening is that the extremists and the people who preach the gospel are pushing forward, and it's opening up these crazy guys who actually believe what they're selling. That's leading to salvation. Like it's there's this weird whirligig effect, and I'm standing looking at it because obviously I'm not in South America and going, huh, neat. I've talked to missionaries that my church supports, and they don't really share my same kind of ironic, hey, this is actually very funny sort of mindset to it, but they do oh yeah, people are interested in the gospel. I don't care what they say they are hereditary. Your grandfather's faith cannot save you. What can save you is your personal faith in the death, burial, and resurrection of Jesus Christ our Lord. He died on the cross for our sins. Your money can't save you. Your house, your medical bills, whatever you put your trust in apart from Jesus Christ will only lead you to damnation. And I think that as these people talk, I think it opens up a lot of people, to the gospel in ways that they haven't before. Anytime, I hear of a traditional Catholic priest, it's always people flocking to him. Anytime I hear you hear of a pastor who has got a little bit of fire to him, his church starts growing. The people want faith. They want the genuine non-boomer, you know, like my pastor tells a story where it's like, how's the church doing? We haven't grown in 20 years, but we're in the black, so everything's all right. And it's like, no, no,
Yep.
that's like it, it's why arguments like tradition or which is we're going to bring up in the Orthodox stream next week.
Yeah.
You
I'm a
definitely
bit.
don't want to miss it.
You
Sorry,
don't. I made notes and everything.
he
No,
did.
no, you're right.
Jump
I
on
did.
in.
Uh, yeah. As I'm looking at this, like Iron VT says, whatever talents, looks, drive, etc., all from God, and they can vanish as whim. And like one thing that is been hard for me personally to accept, but that is absolutely true, is to get out of this mindset of like what the grind considers winning and losing and being a loser and not being a loser, right? Like,
Yep.
and looking at God, because going like, so like, oh, you're living at home, you're living with a lower paying job, and you're not doing it's like, so what? Like, where does is any of this mentioned in the is this mentioned in the Bible? Does God talk about like why are you concerned about any of this? Like, if you're being supported by your parents, like, are you yeah. Uh no, it's fine. So I'm trying to think of how to put this exactly, but it's like, are you putting undue burden on your parents? Are your parents okay with it? Are you right? Like, and are you trying to live life the right way? Like, are you, you know, living for God? Then, like, why are you letting this bother you? It's
Yep.
something that I needed to, like, come to terms with. It's like, So people think that that's something that, like, losers do. First off, that's not really the case anymore, as modern Gen Y and millennials are like, we're all in this together, right? Like, we're all kind of recognizing, like, you're living with your parents. Yeah, it's probably a smart financial decision, right? Like, that's
Right.
literally I've seen that reaction from various people who bring that up like so many times, like more often than I see. Ew, why, right? Like,
Yep.
it's actually not even becoming. But even besides that, it's like, why is this? Like, this shouldn't bother you. Like, it genuinely should not bother you. I'm not saying that you should not try and better yourself. That's absolutely not what I'm saying. Like, I'm saying something very specific, which is like, what do you consider bettering yourself? Is growing more in your faith bettering yourself? Is, trying to improve your prospects and your job and trying to grow? All of this is good. So you're not doing it in the case like society cares about. Like, why do you care? Like, are you not a Christian? Do you not know that the world is against you? Like, what,
Yep.
you know? And this is something that was really hard for me to grasp. Like, intellectually, you grasp it, right? Like,
Yep.
intellectually, I could have told you this years ago. But practically, you got to feel it in your bones. Like, man, I'm, late 20s, still living with family. Like, why? And then I'm just thinking, like, you got to go, like, no, stop that. Like, none of that matters. Like, literally none of that matters. You know, and if somebody is telling you that it matters, that person is not of the gospel. Like, they're wrong. You
Yep.
know, and this is where too, like, being friends with people like Ben and Ken and the Superversive group. Like, Ben has mentioned this in the past. There's something very important about that friendship, not because like we're super close or whatever. We don't live close enough really to be in to be on the Alexander and Hephaestion level, right?
Yep.
Uh, but don't live close enough for that. But there's something important in the sense that, like, I can have a conversation with Ben about these things that does not go into like awkwardness. It does not go into jokes. It does
Yep.
not go into like, I could say to Ben very seriously, and I have, and Ben has said to me very seriously, like, spiritually I'm in despair and I'm not sure what I'm doing. Like, is this what God wants for me? And Ben will listen to that and he will respond with a serious response.
Yep.
Like, he will go, okay, those are things that we should be concerned about, and you are right to be concerned about them. Let's discuss the problem. Like,
Yep.
the fact that there are like, you need to, this is something important for Gen Ys and millennials. You need to talk with people who you can talk to about serious things. I have friends who I don't talk to serious things about, but they're not my only friends. And if they were, that would not be healthy. You need to be able to have a conversation with somebody who is capable of discussing important things, right? Without turning it into something awkward. Yeah, without turning it into something uncomfortable. Because this is the most important thing in your life, is God. Like,
Yep.
number one. Nothing else is on that level. And if that is the case, like, you got to be able to, you should be surrounding yourself with people who understand this. And Ben and I disagree on many things, obviously. Like, I don't agree with anybody on everything. But the fact of the matter is, I can have a conversation with Ben about God. Like, straight up.
Yep.
Like, this was a thing that happened once where I was outside and I mentioned to Ben casually, walking. Like, this was just in the middle of a regular conversation. I didn't even think about the language I was using. I said something like, we do it, it's God's will, so things will be fine. Something like that, right?
Yeah.
I was outside in public and some teenagers started laughing because, like, people don't talk that way. Like, nobody talks that way unironically, especially not somebody our age, right?
Yep.
But I talk that way to Ben, right? Like, we can talk to each other using that language, and neither of us is even going to comment on it because it's normal for us.
Yep.
This is how we think of the world, right? Like,
Yeah.
this is how we process things through the lens of, like, well, what's God's will? You know, like, if we're stuck on a decision, literally this is what we do. Like, we go, well, what's God's will? Right? Like,
Yep.
okay, step back a moment, like, think about it, like, what's God's will? and that's another thing that Ben brought up that's very true, that I've come to realize, that like when we get the command in scripture not to worry and not to fear, and that's something that in scripture, like, we need to be clear here, like God tells us to do this, like this
Yep.
is not an option for us, right? Like it's very difficult,
It's hard.
obviously I worry, yeah, but like it's not something that we could just go like, oh, it's healthier not to worry, no, it's not just that it's healthier, it's like God told us not to fear and not to worry. And one thing that Ben mentioned here that he's absolutely right about, that helped me to realize this, is like, are you sinning? Well, no. Well, then what are you worried about?
Yep.
Right? Like, you know, it's like, what decision should I make? What should I do? Well, hold on. Is either decision going to be a sin? No. Well, then whichever one you pick is going to work out fine. Right? Like, it will be, as long as you're making an effort to do God's will, right? Well, yeah. Okay, so like there is no real wrong choice here. Like God's going to work it out to be the right choice. You know, like that's literally the point,
Yep.
right? That's what trusting God means. That's what faith means. You know, like this was something that happened with jobs where I was like stressing out seriously over it. And again, this has happened both with me and Ben and other friends, where we have been stressing over something like seriously. And then like the answer is like, I don't, like you shouldn't be stressing over this, because the very fact that you are stressed first, like it's the first step, right? Like it's kind of a good sign in a sense. At the very least, it's like, okay, good, you're concerned with God's will. But then the next step after that is, if you believe that, like if you believe in God and you believe not to worry and you're not sinning, then like whichever choice you make, neither one is going to be a bad choice, right? Like
Yep.
it's not going to, things aren't going to crash down around you because you decide to do this instead of that, as long as neither choice is a sin and you're making the effort. Like there's no such thing as like, oh, you wasted years on this. Like there's no such thing as wasted years. God's going to use them, right? Like
Yeah.
there's no such thing as like, oh, you went in this direction and you completely decide to go in a different direction. Well, so what? Like, that's an earthly thing that you're worried about. We're not here for earthly things.
And it's
You know,
like,
you're
y-
you're
sorry.
go ahead.
And it's like, and the context is, of course, that we're not sinning or doing something inherently
Right.
sinful.
Yeah.
So it's like, me doing Quick Trip to get to Vietnam didn't really hurt me, because what it did, and I've only realized this recently, is that it separated me from a group of friends where one of them's almost explicit goal was to keep me down, to keep me in my lane, use me for labor, use me for this, use me for that. And if I dare ask him for anything, it's a problem. Like it's one of those things where it's like, oh, and then I meet other friends who show me different ways to do things. There's a lot of truth in the people who you surround yourself will make you or break you. They'll build you up or destroy you. Beware friends whose feet run to violence. That sort of thing. I watch, from my door, as somebody, insults somebody else and they get jumped for their troubles. Like it's I'm not going to do anything
Yeah.
with that.
And
They're on the public land.
the
But it's
the
like,
similar. Go ahead.
sorry.
I'm sorry. Finish your thought first, and
But
then
it
I'll jump.
Yeah. But it's like, the more I think that Gen Y and my generation in general sort of understands the success of others, the more I think that even if we don't leave the world, like we had it when we were kids, you know, our kids are not going to suffer the same way that we suffered when we hit adulthood. Go on, Anthony.
Yeah, what I was going to say was like, the similar situation with me involved like jobs and figuring out where I was going to go, and it's like, this would require me to leave, and is this the right thing? And then eventually realizing that like that's the wrong attitude, you know. And this was like a discussion, a very funny, in retrospect, of course, but very funny discussion with you where you were just like frustrated with the entire thing, where you're like, stop worrying about this, you
Yep.
know. You were like, you're like you're getting on my nerves, just stop worrying. And then I like slept on the advice and like woke up in the morning and I literally like messaged Ben and is like, it's fine, like I'm not even gonna bring it up again. And I didn't. I basically like just told him what I was doing next.
And I was like,
And I was like,
yes.
yeah, I was just like, I thought over, and like, you're absolutely correct. Like, I should not be this, like, this agonized over it. I should not be this, like, it should not be bothering this much, especially since, like, objectively speaking, this was all good news. Like, oh, you have multiple job offers. How dare you? Yeah. Like, uh, and like Ben was just like and Ben's annoyance, and it was like, to be clear, I say this with like, Ben was annoyed in the sense where he was like, you should know better, right? Like,
Right.
and to be this concerned about this, it's like, think of what you're saying and what you have said to me. It's like, neither of these are a problem. Just talk about it with your family and then move on. And then like, I said, I'm like, yeah, I don't know what the problem is, and then that's exactly what I did. uh and so it was kind of similar to what Ben's talking about. Don't get me wrong, like, the situations had many differences, but I mean, in like, the lesson that we took out of it, I think, was similar. uh
There's
and
like there's something else to it too. Like, even though the world that we expected to be there wasn't there for Gen Y, and even for the millennials, like, it's not a bad world in America where I'm sitting in a climate controlled room playing a video game, you know, while I stream and chat with friends, with a full belly. In fact, such a full belly, I haven't even finished, all my food. Though I will. I will. I'm fat, so I will be eating.
yeah, there's
But
gratitude here too,
yeah,
right? Where it's like, oh, you're living with your family, and then like, mention this to somebody in the Middle Ages, and I know they go, well, you're going far back, but no, like, in the height of Christendom, right? Like,
yep,
in the height of Christendom, and they would be confused that people who weren't living with their family, right? They would
yep,
be confused if you were to go, wait a minute, you moved out on your own? Like, where did somebody offer you an opportunity? Like, that's unusual, you know.
yep,
And I don't think that they would necessarily, don't get me wrong. I don't say this in the sense, like, I don't think that somebody from the Middle Ages would necessarily be horrified by the simple fact that you moved away. I think, if anything, they might even be impressed that you were capable of doing it. You know, it's like the old meme where you talk to somebody from the past who's time traveled, and then they go, so I wanted to ask you, what was it like in the 1800s? And they respond, wait a minute, you stepped on the moon? And then they go, like, anyway, like, they go, so what's it like living without heat? And then they go, the moon and the sky. They go, you stepped on. It's a little bit. It's a little bit like that, right? Uh, but at the same time, like, there's definitely something to the idea of, you know living with, like, the fact that we're living with family in a good situation, we're working, we have stuff, like, we have so much to be grateful for. And ultimately, that's the key to all of it. And this is why I say this too. It's like, when I talk about all of this stuff, this criticism of boomers, like, you go, so are you angry? Are you like, I'm saying this, like, pretty much, I I I know that the people who are listening to the stream probably get what I'm saying, but there will be other people, especially, like, I've noticed this with Gen Xers, to be honest with you, but who are going to be like, wow, you're very bitter. It's like, I promise you, I am not bitter. Like, I don't know how else to say it. Like, there's no real way for me to get this across without sounding at
yeah,
least like, oh, so you're so angry at baby boomers. It's like, no, I'm not. Like, to be honest, throughout most of the day, I don't think about this. When I sit down and I could logically say this, yeah, individual baby boomers, they obviously are good people in there. Like, that goes without saying, right? Like, but I don't go through my day bitter and angry at the baby boomer generation. Most of the time, they don't cross my mind. You know, uh, I go through my day trying to figure out how best to serve God's will, and trying to accomplish my responsibilities without losing my mind, and trying each day to be more grateful for the things that we do have, which is a lot.
yep,
Now, do I think that we're currently on the path to uh, America, the what we consider modern day America, ending? Yes, I do. 100% I do. I don't think that we're in a world where that will I don't think we're going to see America last for the our entire lifetimes unless we die young. Um, but that doesn't mean that there isn't a lot to be thankful for. It even goes into like Ben knows that like this is something that's a concern for both of us. Finding a wife. Now there are like my attitude on this has absolutely changed over the years, and I think hopefully to a healthier place. Uh, like on one hand, I do think it's something that we both need to be genuinely concerned about, right?
Right.
Uh, like I don't think it's something that we should just ignore and go like, oh, it'll happen when it happens. Like, sure, that's true to an extent, but the Lord expects you to take some responsibility for your life, right? Like, uh, and having a family, and that's part of your vocation and where you're going to go using some Catholic language there, but I think is recognizable to everyone, right?
Right.
Uh, and I had to do like some serious experiment and stuff, and now I'm in a place where like I'm pretty sure that that's where I'm heading, right? Like that one day I'm going to end up married. Yeah, and I don't think that just sitting back and like waiting and saying, "Well, it'll happen when it happens." Like I don't think that's necessarily a healthy way to go about it, right? Like,
Yeah.
with that said, there's a flip side to this where it does not consume my every waking moment. Yeah, like it does not. It should not. You know, I mentioned this to them, like, what's my primary goal this year? Like, well, I have a job. You know, I have a job. I'm educated. I'm religious. I have interesting hobbies like Pinkerton's ghosts, right? So ultimately, it's like I'm a pretty interesting person in many ways. So why am I not married? It's 'cause I need to get in shape, right? Now, so that's my goal this year. Get in good shape, right? And
Yeah.
when I say this, I don't say it with any hint of bitterness. I don't say it with any, with any, you know, with any anger at like the female sex for, leaving me alone. Nor do I say this with desperation, right? I'm not desperate, but I am making the concrete steps to improve myself so that it will be easier for me to later find a wife, right? Like I
Yeah.
am still actively working towards it. And as long as I'm doing that, as long as I can say to myself, am I working towards that goal properly? Then I could say, I'll trust God's timing. But if I'm not doing that, then it's like, well, you consider this important, but you're not doing anything about it. Yeah. Like this is the main thing I need to do is get in shape. That I know this, right? Like intellectually, it doesn't mean I'm going to despair over it. It doesn't mean I'm going to obsess over it. It doesn't mean I'm going to become a simp or right, like
Yep.
start going over e-girls. But it does mean that this is something that I'm going to genuinely be concerned about in my life. Like I need to take this into account and move forward with that in mind. Aaron VT says, "You're preaching to the choir a bit, but I'm more encouraged about where my life is and where I ought to go. Feel free to keep going." Yeah. Reverend Walker says, "Hardcore Catholics are the ones that are growing. Same with the Orthodox." This is true.
Yep.
Uh, generally anyone hardcore. You know, I've mentioned this kind of obliquely before, so I'll say it directly now. Like with the current Pope in office and all of that stuff, it's like for Protestants, I'm not going to insult you by saying that you want a hardcore traditionalist Catholic as Pope, because obviously, like what you would want if you were a Protestant is a Pope who said, "Yeah, Protestant's fine."
Uh,
But
no, you'd be shocked. Like, you have to understand. Like, Protestants are like the uber fighty, but like honest fighty part of the Christian Church. The if there's some like super Chad Pope who can quote scripture and the church fathers with equal ease, that be a Catholic Church worth arguing against. You know what I mean? I'd
yeah, I get
actually
your point. What I was going to say is like Francis as Pope is not good for the Protestants either, right? Like,
no.
yeah. The with all due respect to the Holy Father, he was not the man that we needed in the off. He's not the man we need in office. He's not the man. He's not the man of the hour, right? Needless to say, I think it's fairly clear. Uh, it's one of those things, right? Like you when a healthier Catholic Church would be better for all of Western civilization than what we have now.
Yep.
Now, like my opinion on the Catholic Church and Vatican II and all of that, it has changed somewhat. Like I'm more sympathetic to Vatican II. Like I've went back and forth on this. I was taught growing up that Vatican II was misinterpreted, but fine. Then I went like, well, no, there are actually like intentional ambiguities in there. I'm now more where I was originally, where like if Vatican II is interpreted properly, but the problem is it was never intended to be interpreted properly. It was seized almost immediately, and it was s- stretched and destroyed, and then nobody really put the effort into it, right? Like
Yeah.
that was kind of the goal from the start. So uh that said, and I think too, when you look at like Benedict XVI, God bless his soul, his last words were "Jesus, I love you." Uh, may all of us have the same last words on our lips.
Yep.
Yeah, that's a beautiful thing. And Benedict XVI, God bless his soul, but he was not the pope we needed at the time either, right?
Yeah.
Uh, he strikes me as a man overwhelmed, like hence the resignation. He could not stop the sex abuse crisis. He could not clean up the banks. You know, he really and
The
he did
Lavender
not.
Mafia didn't let him do
Yeah, the
anything. Like
Lavender
it's.
Mafia still exists, and then he resigned, and Francis took over. Now, for all of that being said, right? I'm not here to throw stones at Pope Benedict. It's an extremely difficult job. Uh, Somebody I read pointed out that like it's always been a difficult job, and anybody who's taken office who has really left behind, like anybody who we recognize as a great pope years later, tends to have left behind a legacy for the church. That was greater than the office, kind of. And in that sense, I think that John Paul II was the better pope. He was one of the three great titans in the fall of communism in Europe. Uh, and he also wrote Theology of the Body, which is a monumental work on marriage and sexuality that like completely defined modern Catholicism's view of sexuality in the face of the culture. It's also, by the way, as a hint to the Orthodoxy stream, something that Orthodoxy really has not done and is not capable of doing. You know,
Yep.
they don't have a figure that can, do something like that. And they don't have a church that like can release a Humanae Vitae, which was the document where the Catholic Church, in the face, by the way, of theologians advising against it, the Pope was able to come out and go, "We are against contraception," right? Like the Catholic Church is, defined through the ages as being anti-contraception, and we are
Yep.
still to this day. And you could say what you want about like Paul VI and people have, but that was a document that the church needed. And it's a document that now, at the very least, no matter what you say about modern Catholics, if you are against contraception, you're against, right, like, and all of that, you are against the teaching of the church. Orthodoxy has never really done anything like that and isn't capable of doing that. They can't respond to contraception. So this is why you see things like the Greek Orthodox saying that, we don't know, it's up to the priest. Well, the Catholic Church can answer this question, right? Like,
Yep.
and they did, and it was a very brave thing that Paul VI did in defiance of, a lot of people, and for that reason, I do have respect for the man. Now, when we're talking about a man like Francis, I'm not on the train of Francis as like, you know, an outright evil person. I just think that Francis was somebody who thrived in the original situation he was in. He was in like a communist country, Argentina. There was, and I mean this, there was like a revolution going on. He was smuggling priests out of the country. Uh, right, like this was his original role. He would go around on foot to the various to the people in the countryside and preach to them. And there is a time and a place for a man like Francis in that context, right?
Yeah.
But that is the Pope is an extremely different position, and it's not the position of a man like that who is more, he would say he's more concerned about the pastoral needs of individual souls And that is true, I guess.
You there, Anthony?
Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you now. I think the last word you said was "I guess."
Hello? Okay. Yeah, I guess there is that what I was saying is I guess that makes sense to the point where like there were people these were people who were at under threat of death, literally death, like at any time,
Yep.
and you wanted to see somebody who was showing up. Yeah, and who somebody who and he was, for all of his flaws, like Francis, people will say he was a communist, but he wasn't. There was a communist regime and he was opposing it, right? Like uh he certainly, I think that this did leave him communist sympathetic, which is another discussion for another time, but uh nevertheless, I think that like that's the time and place where you need somebody who is active, going around and being a pastor to people who are under genuine threat of death. However, the papacy is a very different position. You are now the pastor to all Catholics, and your primary role is no longer to visit individual people, which is impossible. It is not to pastor to a specific persecuted group and show them the love of Christ directly. It is to clarify doctrine for a church and the world, and to and to deal with all of the specific issues that the church hierarchy is suffering. And in that sense, Francis is, uh, if I may be permitted to say this, a miserable failure. He his doctrine appears to be, I don't think he is an outright heretic, but I think that he doesn't particularly care if he's perceived as a heretic because he was so concerned, like, again, as a cardinal and as a priest in Argentina, he was so concerned with just like getting the word of God out to people who could be killed for being Christian. Like that, whether or not he is strictly accurate in what he says is something that isn't so important to him. And that is a problem when you are the actual pope, right? Like
Right.
when
I shouldn't laugh,
your
but
word,
it's yeah.
you're
Sorry.
absolutely right, though, to laugh, right? It's funny. And this is the same thing, like with the Pachamama incident. Like, do I think there was idol worship going on? Um, I think that there might have been people in the Vatican who were doing idol worship. As far as I could tell, Francis was not part of it. However, I think his attitude was probably something along the lines of, like, I don't think Francis is an idiot. This is the argument of people like Michael Lofton, who I have great respect for, but it's like Francis was so stupid he thought it was just an image of Mary, even though they were calling it Pachamama, and he called it Pachamama later, and it looks nothing like Mary. Uh, but like he's just so dumb that this is what he thought. And it's like, yeah, I don't buy that. I think rather what it was he thought it was some sort of Amazonian worship thing. And he said, like, and somebody told him, no, no, Holy Father, it's like Mary. And he said, you know what? Do it. Right? And if conservatives have an issue with it, I'll deal with those stuffy traditionalists. And like permitted idol worship just kind of to show that he was inclusive. Yeah, like I think the idea was like we're going to be inclusive by allowing this, clear foreign statue, and if people ask, it's a statue of Mary, right? Like otherwise, the alternative is that Francis is an extremely dumb man, you know,
Right.
and I don't believe that. Like even reading interviews, he does not come. I don't think that he's a genius or anything, not on the level of Benedict XVI and John Paul II, who actually were geniuses, but he is not that stupid. You know, like he can hold a coherent train of thought. He can make a coherent train of thought. Uh, the real problem with Francis has been his appointments and in what he hasn't done. He has not cracked down on the sex abuse crisis. The McCarrick scandal was abysmal. I don't even know what's going on there. Uh, I don't know what he's doing with the church in China. He's even like mentioned it in passing a few times, and when he's made ambiguous statements on doctrine, he has refused, like steadfastly refused to clarify. Like literally cardinals were begging him to clarify. Like they put together a group of cardinals, put together a statement called a dubia, a question, asking him to clarify. Like, hey man, did you say that like if you're divorced and remarried, You could take the Eucharist? Like, what's up with that?" And he just, like, ignored the question. Like, he would not answer it.
Another
Uh,
time, Nancy Pelosi and her archbishop actually went to task over abortion, and her archbishop, for her diocese, basically said, "Look, you're never going to get communion from me." And then she went to the Vatican, and he gave her, he had her, he gave her mass, he gave her communion.
right. This is one of the, like, somebody, I think it wasn't him directly who gave her communion, somebody else did. But then it
Right,
becomes like, are you going to tell me, like, then this goes back to, like, so how dumb do you think the Pope is?
right.
Like, you're going to tell me he didn't know this? Or he appoints James Martin, who was snake. Like, an actual, like, he was a snake. He appoints James Martin to a leadership position in the Vatican. And it's like, and then Father Frank Pavone, who was the former Father Frank Pavone, I should say, because I do believe that he has every right to laicize him. But the former Father Frank Pavone, who was the head of the Priests for Life and did great work for the unborn, but was openly conservative, gets laicized, and Father James Martin gets promoted. So
So
the
you
question
have to
becomes, like,
understand, for those who don't know what laicization means, the Pope called him into the office, called him a loose cannon, and demanded his frock and his crucifix, and then sent him out of his office.
essentially, he
Yeah.
told him you're not allowed to practice as a priest anymore,
Ugh.
right? And there is no recourse for this because it's all the way at the level of the Pope. Now there is a question of, like, well, did Frank Pavone deserve this? And I think you can make an argument that he did, in the sense that, like, he was not obeying the orders from his bishops, and you take a vow of obedience, right? And he was intentionally trying to skirt the orders. But you're also like, but isn't that not really the point? Like, the fact of the matter is, Frank Pavone, because he did not show outward obedience to his bishop, was laicized, and James Martin, who is openly subverting, like, define church dogma, is promoted. Like, what are we doing? What's going on? You know,
Yeah.
like, do I think Frank Pavone is necessarily some persecuted hero? No, I wouldn't go that far. Like, I think he should have just listened. If his bishops told him to stop doing something, which in this case it was preaching for, like, his work for the unborn. Like, I think that first he got the timeline of events is that he got involved in Donald Trump's political campaign, which is openly not permitted. Like, you can't do that if you're religious. Get involved in either side's political campaign. Then later on, like, he made some sort of video where he used an aborted fetus on a table that was sometimes used as an altar, and to make a point about, like, that abortion was like a sacrament for the left. And I've seen people go like, "Well, that's blasphemy," and I'm like, "Come on, though! Like, this is the man who headed the Priests for Life. Like, you got to look at intention to a point."
Yeah.
you know like, obviously, I don't think it was appropriate, but then to be like, it's blasphemy. Like, so what are you saying, that he thinks that the baby should be sacrificed? Like, clearly he does not. Like, it was at best bad optics, right? Like,
Yeah.
y- and then it turned into, his bishops were telling him to stop doing his work with the unborn and just go back to parish work, which happens a lot. Like, this isn't really that unusual that they did this. Like, I don't even know the exact context of it. And he was intentionally, like, going from parish to parish to avoid having to answer to a specific bishop. So, which is why the case had to be kicked up to the Pope. Now, all of this is to say that, like, I do think you take a vow of obedience. You take a vow of obedience. It's part of the vows that you take. Like, that's literally a promise. You've given your word. And he broke some rules. And sure, I can see why you would think that laicization was a necessary step when he's intentionally avoiding, like, having a superior, right? But at the same time, you're going like, okay, but if you're going to take the step with a man like Frank Pavone and you're not with James Martin, you're going to promote James Martin. Like, so what you're telling me is what you value is outward appearance of obedience over actual fidelity to the doctrines of the church. And that's really disturbing to me. Like, that is a deep, deep problem. I agree. I think we're under a period of chastisement right now. Uh And that is something that really bothers me. And the fact that there are people who will sometimes defend this, like, I don't think that there's really I don't think there's really a defense for this.
Yeah, and this is kind of like deep Catholic lore from my perspective, because even though I made the joke, it's like turn in your gun and your badge, your laicized. There's a
You're
lot of
kind of right though, right?
yeah,
Like,
but there's problems with it that come from before we were ever born, like
oh yeah.
and like what I made an offhand comment that many Orthodox churches were basically communist KGB safe houses, and somebody said, well, look, that's not what happened. And then there was a video by Radical Liberation, which was 10 out of 10, that basically shows that the communists killed all the priests they could get their hands on.
Yeah,
All the
they did.
Orthodox, patriarchs and stuff like that. Only a few survived, and those were the ones who, they knew that if they killed them, they couldn't control the people in any sort of situation, namely the Patriarch of Moscow and a couple others. Um, but it's like with this stuff that goes on, it only behooves us to act more and act more heroically. Um, we're not called to be soft for God. We're called to run the race. Paul uses active language in both, the Latin and the not Latin. What did he write in? No, I think it was Latin. Yeah, uh, where you run the race. It's active. Um, what's going to happen is that there's going to be an undercurrent of faithful Catholics, and eventually, as the unfaithful Catholics die off, you know, they'll find that the people replacing them are either worse than them and don't know how to handle power, which is what we're seeing now in politics and other things, but priests tend to be more long lived than your average politician. Uh, it's it'll crop up differently. Um, like one of the things that's passing away in evangelical circles is all the end times nonsense. You know, we've seen enough false prophets. We know that God only knows the day and the hour. Internet Historian did one on Harold Camping, and he basically said, "Look, in fairness to Christians, this guy's a nut. This is the Bible verses that people point to. Like even unchristian, internet humorists, um, know better than to accept the lies and the schlock that men like James Martin, men by birth, not by action, uh, that they're peddling. It's the reason why traditional Catholics flock to, Father Youngtrad, as he's called on the internet. It's the reason why, churches in Protestantism are growing if the pastor is even a little bit on fire for God. But the thing
Hmm.
is that it's slow. And you have to be on fire to God to seek God. Like, even though I experience many depressions and problems, and I'm getting sick again, and I don't know why God let me get sick again, and, maybe it's the stress I'm not giving to Him that's compromising my immune system, the health benefits of trusting God. It's, you know, I have a pastor who's on fire for God. Therefore, because I wish to serve God, I treat my pastor as my spiritual, superior. The fellow you talked about, Anthony, he sounds like he did some great work for the unborn. He really put the pin
He
to them.
did.
Like even though there's you know, I don't understand the rules enough for what he did on the table, but he, on the altar rather. But his message, what he's saying, is very true. Abortion is a sacrament to them. The
Yeah, and he's
laziness.
right.
Yep. And the laziness of Gen Y is the thing that Satan wants to propagate to keep things down, the wrath of the millennials. Well, I think maybe Gen Z is more wrathful, but like all these things will keep people down. And they'll keep down churches, and they'll keep down parishes, and they'll keep down, whatever you want to say. But Anthony, we've talked enough. I think I'm gonna finish up
Yep, yep.
the comments. Aaron VT says, wait, sorry. Let's see. There we go. Megabuster Shepherd says, our generation doesn't want to rock the boat. In other words, yeah, that's a way to put it. But it's more like anytime we try to rock the boat, or even just man the oars, the older generation goes, "No, no, sit down there. Don't touch anything. Play with a compass or something." That's more to it, to the truth of it. Boomers were fine rocking the boat. Aaron VT, I hate the term sloth versus acedia. I'm not sitting still. I'm in a near constant state of uneasiness and agitation, which is what gets in my way. And the source is despair, not laziness. Yeah, and I think I commented pretty well on that earlier. Um, but it's the more we give to God and the more we act like men, who seek God, and the more we act like men in general, the better things are. Uh, I started improving at work when I just stopped worrying about some stuff, that made me womanly, in a way. Uh, Bradford Walker says the hardcore Catholics are the ones that are growing. Same with the Orthodox. Yep, that's all I have to say on that. All faithful denominations are growing as those who are not faithful but rather on inertia are declining. Like I said, Hispanics, even though they're majority Catholic, quote unquote, a lot of that is cultural inertia, not real faith. If they had been as on fire for God as the implication would be, they would be in a different situation than they are now. Uh, the they wouldn't be tossed around by every dictator, by every little political movement, and so on and so forth. Aaron VT, yes, you are preaching to the choir a bit, but I'm certainly more encouraged about where my life is and where I ought to go. Feel free to keep going. Thank you, sir. And I'll try to remember you in my prayers. Megabuster Shepherd, the church may be under a period of chastisement. Capital Church. Yeah, I could see that. There have been times when popes and bishops and so on have been just miserable. And there have been times, like we're coming out of a time when megachurch was the goal, not the kind of exception to the rule of having a small church. Like, most of the churches that were mega churches in the early 1900s, the first ones, were run by men like Spurgeon and Billy Sunday and others who were on fire for God, without exception. Uh, it's how far we've come, sort of thing. Uh, Megabuster Shepherd, Rip Alexander Mann, martyred by Moscow in '95, the last great Orthodox priest in Russia. Of Russia, I couldn't tell you anything about him. But if he is a true priest and a true man of God, he is with his Father in heaven. And that's ultimately where I put my hope, and I believe I may put Anthony in that category as well, and Ken and most of the Superversives. Um, our hope is nothing less than Jesus Christ. Anthony, how are you doing? Do you have any final words for us?
Just I'm looking forward to the Orthodox discussion. I'm happy with the commentary that I have in my notes. So this is just a brief sneak peek, but I put serious thought into orthodoxy as a live option, in the sense that I consider there to be three viable Christian traditions for people to consider, which is uh, church with magisterium, church without active magisterium. They do have some form of magisterium, but not active in the same sense as Catholics. And scripture as final authority. Uh, so looking at the three great traditions, I put serious thought into like, okay, so we're not discussing Protestantism, so I only mentioned briefly like I'm not a Protestant. This is why, and I'm not going to argue it now because that's not the point. But
Yeah.
like genuinely, like if I'm rejecting orthodoxy, why? So I'm looking forward to that.
Yep. I'm looking forward to it too. A lot of my thing will be sort of reputation and theology. Anthony's will be a mystery, I guess. But do look forward to it
We'll
next week.
see. Yeah, we'll see. I gave a sneak peek, so we'll see
Yeah,
next
yes.
week.
Yes. I want to thank you all for joining us. Mega Buster Shepherd, real quick, says Anthony Byzantine Rite. Everything great about
No,
orthodoxy, but under the
I
Pope.
even I mentioned it in my notes page, as a matter of fact.
Oh
I don't know
ho
if Ben
ho!
looked at it or not, but I did.
Quicker on the draw.
Uh, with that said, as an Italian, it is technically an executable offense if I am not a Roman Catholic.
It's true. It is true. I've seen it before. Uh,
I can't go Byzantine. I gotta stay Roman. Like, being an Italian, like, it's just, it's in the blood.
yep, yep. All right. Have a good night, guys. Join us next week and have a wonderful evening.